let's talk about some goddamn war. Hello everyone, Mouse98 here with a brand new motherfucking video, and today's subject is on Protracted People's War. Now, I have touched on this subject before on my video response to Finbo on Maoism, but I feel most leftists still deny the universality of this tactic, and I can see why. So I'll break this video into three parts. Part 1 will be the short explanation of the origin of the PPW. The second part will be my case on how it's universal, and the last part will be literature recommendation on guerrilla warfare. So yeah, let's begin. The originality of the Protracted People's War comes from On Protracted War by Chinese revolutionary Mao Tse-tung. It was tactics to be used during the Chinese Revolution in the Second World War. It was mainly used for small armed groups to avoid large decisive battles in favor for a three-stage strategy for victory. Stage 1 was to start in remote areas, that being in mountainous or forested terrain where the enemy had no familiarity and is primarily weakened. The said army is to establish a stronghold on the area for a base of operations. Whilst it grows in power, it will enter in Stage 2. Now, Stage 2 will help spread other bases and was to increase its influence of the countryside. This will help it gain popularity and will lead to Stage 3, which is that the group is now strong enough to encircle and capture the city. Now, this was part of Mao Zedong thought, which at the time was the highest form of Marxism-Leninism, and were only applicable to China. Now, there has been various forms of the PPW been used outside of China with varying degrees of progress. Now, from the get-go, one can imagine why someone would think that this isn't universal, given the fact it was originally intended for China, which at the time was a semi-feudal nation. However, it wouldn't be until the early 80s, in the synthesization of Maoism by Chairman Gonzalo, that the PPW would become universal. Now, there has been arguments from revisionists that there is no universality of the Protracted People's War, and that it is only good for the Third World or places that are majority world. No communist has argued for just countryside battles, but we realize that it can be applied in urban areas, as the peasantry is now extinct. The PCP have even stated that the Protracted People's War in urban areas will play a greater role. We must also remember that the synthesization of the PPW understands the concept of imperial world and the colonized world. Now, the article I'm using to cite this is a response to a well-known revisionist, Yosa Sison, who claims that it is most likely to happen in countries that aren't fully quote-unquote industrialized, which the article states that he fails to understand that most, if not all, third world countries are now industrious, and that it is agreed upon that it will not be world peasant war in the imperial countries, but urban tactics that will have to be adopted. Okay, so here I have another long-ass quote, so I'm going to just break it up into two and analyze it. Now, the first quote says, or at least the first half says, quote, "You must fully bear in mind that subsequently Chairman Mao himself, aware of the existence of atomic bombs and missiles, and with China already having them, sustained and developed People's War in order to wage it in under the new conditions of atomic weapons and of war against powers and superpowers. In synthesis, People's War is the weapon of the proletariat and of the people, even to confront atomic wars," end quote. So we can see here that even the People's War during a time where there was new atomic weaponry, because remember, the Chinese Revolution lasted until 1949, even with the new superpowers and new atomic weaponry, the people still used the Protracted People's War as a means to fight back. It was sort of an advantage. Well, it wasn't sort of, it was an advantage. Quote, "A key and decisive question is the understanding of the universal validity of People's War and its subsequent application, taking into account the different types of revolution and the specific conditions of each revolution. To clarify this key issue, it is important to consider that no insurrection, like that of Petrograd, the anti-fascist resistance, or the European guerrilla movements in the Second World War, have been repeated, as well as considering the armed struggles that are presently being waged in Europe. In the first analysis, the October Revolution was not only an insurrection but a revolutionary war that lasted for several years. Consequently, in the imperialist countries, the revolution can only be conceived as a revolutionary war, which today is simply people's war. Finally, today, more than ever, we communists and revolutionaries, the potential and the people need to forge ourselves in, quote, yes, we are adherents to at the theory of the omnipotence of the Revolutionary War. That is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. It is Marxist, end quote, which means adhering to the invincibility of the People's War, end quote. And yes, there was a quote within a quote, so yeah, sorry if that sounded a little awkward. Now, if I'm correct in my analysis, the quote is supposed to say that at the end of the day, the revolution in Russia ended as a people's war. Now, not in the same sense as protracted people's war, but a people's war nonetheless, since it was the people against the bourgeois state, the czarist state, and so on and so forth. They only won due to the revolutionary tactics they used, due to the people and due to the armed forces. It was not the insurrection as it started out to be. It was never an insurrection. It was a revolution from the get-go. Chairman Gonzalo even states that PPW can be adapted under different specific conditions that can be fought in the countryside and within the cities. Just as the quote stated, because the quote also said that it can be adopted under different circumstances depending on where the revolution is occurring. So in no way is protracted people's war restricted to China or the countryside. So I don't know where this idea keeps coming up that is just restricted to those areas. I guess for the most part it's because people never really done any investigation, which is dangerous and can be a form of liberalism, because remember what Mao said, no investigation, no right to speak. But yeah, now let's move on to the literature on or related to protracted people's war. One of the books I mentioned in the video response to Finbull was a book written by Brazilian Marxist-Leninist Carlos Margarella. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. It's called The Mini Manual of the Urban Guerrilla. It's a great short read. Some of his plans can be incorporated into the protracted people's war in urban areas. Long ago, there was a West German faction known as the RAF that has some texts on urban warfare. I haven't read any of their texts, but I have heard positive things from a friend. So yeah, there will be a link in the description. Now, On Protracted War by Mao Tse-tung is still an important read. People's War, People's Army is also something I recommend one should read, as it takes inspiration from Protracted People's War and applied it in Vietnam. It is by former military strategist Vo Nguyen Giap. Again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. I will also have a link on People's War by the Naxalite in the description. Now, before I go, I must say that I have heard arguments about protracted people war not working. Usually the argument goes that if it worked, there would be socialist countries right now. Well, we must remember that success doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it takes years. I mean, the secret agents are already familiar with these tactics and already have counter plans. I mean, you think these books go unchecked by the government or anything like that? Come on. Along with massive anti-communist propaganda to get the people against us. So, we're already fucked from the get-go. But still, the People's War is still universal. But that doesn't mean it will make revolution short. Hell, for China, it took from 1927 to 1949. And if we are using the fact that there are no socialist countries right now, then I guess I also should discount Leninism as a whole for, not winning in places such as Ecuador or Peru, with FARC and the Tupac party, whatever the fuck they were called in Peru. So I guess that discounts it too, according to the logic of these revisionists. Listen, the point being is that revolution is not an overnight thing. Sometimes it may take days, sometimes it may take years, hell, it may even take centuries. This is not a tea party, people. Of course, when one revolution succeeds, another one's going to take longer because the capitalist parasite will have evolved into something to help fight back against the revolution. So that does not discount protracted people's war, and that does not discount Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. So anyway, that's going to be the video for today, guys. I know it's not as long or as you would think, and I hope I gave it to you in a digestible way. I hope you understood what I was saying in terms of how it is universal. Again, I'll have links down in the description. If you like this video, like it, dislike it if you dislike it, critique me if you have any critiques, follow, subscribe, ring the bell, all that horseshit. Now, in the next video, I'm going to go over Black Hammer. If you know anything about Gazi Kodo, or whatever the fuck his name is, because there is some serious shit going on there, and yeah, I may try to cover that as quickly as I can. Anyway, this is Mouse88. Wishing you having a good day. Wherever the fuck, yeah, goodbye. I'm signing off.